One of the big stories, so many big stories really off the playing field, if you will, this week. Some great reporting on what's going on at Dartmouth in terms of the National Labor Relations Board and them actually being called athletes. I don't want to mess this up, so I'm bringing the experts. The guy who wrote the piece, Steve Berkowitz, he's a reporter for USA Today. We are thrilled to have him on here for some explanation. Steve, welcome to the show. Hopefully I got that little small part right. Either way, correct me and tell us what's going on. This is really big.
Sure. What's happening here is that a regional director of the National Labor Relations Board has made a finding that the men's basketball players at Dartmouth College are school employees, and she has ordered a union vote, so a vote on whether or not, among the players, whether or not to form a union. And so that's the basic crux of what's gone on here. This is really similar to what went on roughly 10 years ago with the Northwestern football team. There was a similar circumstance. A similar complaint was filed, similar hearings were held, and a similar finding was made by the regional director, in the Chicago area at that time. And so what ended up happening in the Northwestern case, a vote was taken of the players, but the results of that vote were never made known because Northwestern exercised its right to request a review of the regional director's decision by the full 5-member National Labor Relations Board in Washington. And what ended up happening was the NLRB full board made sort of like, it was kind of a technical decision, but they determined that they didn't have jurisdiction in the matter because the way the National Labor Relations Act is set up, it applies to private employers, or in this instance, a private school. And because the National Labor Relations Act charges the NLRB with maintaining sort of order within an employment or an industry, they found that if they had acted and went through and approved the regional director's finding and put all that in play with Northwestern, that would have created sort of a chaotic environment in major college football, because you would have a circumstance where it's not applicable to public schools. So what's going on here, Dartmouth presumably will ask the NLRB to review the case, so there'll be a vote, but we won't know the outcome of it. And in the meantime, this appeal will go on to the NLRB, which will take quite a while. I believe it was almost a year and a half in the Northwestern case before the NLRB ruled. And even if the NLRB backs the regional director's decision, Dartmouth would have the option to then appeal that ruling into a federal appeals court. And federal appellate courts take a significant amount of time to make decisions. So, unless Dartmouth comes to an agreement with the players in some other form or fashion, this is going to spool out potentially for several years.
Wow. So it joins the chaos that we see going on across college sports right now. Is it fair to say that the NCAA seems to be going to court, fighting yesterday's battles today and setting themselves up for losses? Because even this latest round with Tennessee, it seemed, I don't know how they enforce anything anymore.
Well, I mean, first of all, you got to keep in mind the NCAA isn't going to court. The NCAA is getting sued.
Right, exactly.
So it's not like they're being given a choice in the matter. And yeah, I mean, but for the most part, they're defending these cases. Now, they, reached a sort of a temporary settlement in one of the lawsuits that came up around the transfer restrictions, forcing athletes to have to go through a waiver process if they want to transfer more than once. And so the NCAA sort of backed off on that. But yeah, I mean, in most of these instances, they're attempting to defend their rule structure. And they're embroiled in another NLRB complaint, which is going before an administrative law judge in Los Angeles. And that case involves football players, men's and women's basketball players at University of Southern California. And that complaint has been lodged against USC, the Pac-12, and the NCAA. And that case differs from the Dartmouth case in that generally, like, remember when I said that the National Labor Relations Act deals with private employers. What the NLRB local office in LA is attempting to do is pursue what's called a joint employer complaint, and saying that the players are jointly employed by the university, by the Pac-12, and by the NCAA. And because the NCAA is this big national organization, if the administrative law judge buys that argument, that notion of joint employer status in this case sort of gets you around this being limited to private entities. And so an adverse ruling for the NCAA in that case potentially sets up the prospect of labor organization in public schools, and then you run into some conflicts with state laws that don't allow public employees to be unionized. But it definitely expands the field of what you're looking at here beyond what's going on with Dartmouth. And there are some ways that the Dartmouth case could spread, and we can talk about that if you'd like.
Yeah. Talking with Steve Berkowitz of USA Today again about this big decision a few days ago with the Dartmouth basketball players. Let's try to get down the line just a little bit. And I guess here's a big question. It feels like with all the changes, and we're talking about it's 2024, and of course the Big Ten and SEC are expanding. The ACC also adding teams, but they don't have the big money contract the other two conferences do. It feels like this is, even though we're not there yet, and like you said, it's going to be years down the line before this is resolved, but we are heading in that direction where student athletes, we may look up in 6, 7, 8 years, and they're considered employees of these universities, or there's some kind of salary cap, as Rick Pitino talked about this week, or it feels like this is another small step in that direction, even though we have a long way to go.
Agreed. No, I mean, there's no question. And sort of what that ends up looking like, remains to be seen. I mean, Charlie Baker the NCAA's president, Charlie Baker, has been asking Congress to pass a law that would sort of create this sort of special kind of employment, quote unquote, employment status for college athletes, so that they're not declared employees of the schools in the traditional sense of employment, for a whole variety of reasons that get pretty far flung pretty quickly. But the NCAA and the schools are desperately trying to avoid a circumstance where athletes are declared to be employees of the schools. And, how this will manifest itself in terms of the compensation that athletes are able to get, even beyond what they're getting from NIL. I mean, the way Charlie Baker's latest proposal to address this looks at it is it's sort of bringing all the name, image, and likeness stuff in-house with the schools. The schools would be able to make NIL deals with the athletes. There really wouldn't be any limit on the amount of money that athletes could get, and it would be a much more deregulated environment relative to the NCAA rulebook. What that looks like over time, I mean, that's anyone's guess. And it may also end up having to do with how the schools are aligned with each other, whether or not you have like a super conference or a rearranging of what, the current conference and, what is currently known as the Power 4 or Power 5 structure looks like.
When you take a look at this, there's a lot of directions. What do you see the pathway being if you had to try to predict the future, understanding that there's some X factors, but do you see a more likely path for this to head down?
I'm not sure what path it will head down or how it will get there, but it seems pretty clear that over time, and I'm not sure whether that time frame is a year, 2 years, 5 years, and whether it's going to go through, is it going to go through the courts? Is it going to go through the National Labor Relations Board? Is it going to go through Congress? What the way you're going to get there? But I mean, there's clearly going to be a circumstance where athletes are going to be able to get greater and greater compensation. And the question is whether or not ultimately you end up either with a essentially revenue sharing between the schools and the athletes, particularly in men's basketball and football, and to some extent in women's basketball and potentially other revenue generating sports. They may not operate at surplus, but baseball generates revenue. The schools may be operating the sport at a loss, but they're bringing in money. So I think you're going to end up it's in some form or fashion, whether it's through collective bargaining, through some other form of revenue sharing or compensating of the players, that's going to continue to expand.
Another possibility in this I can see where, and we're already seeing where there's this partnership, this alliance, advisory panel combined with the presidents and chancellors and the athletic directors from the Big Ten and the SEC. I can also see where this goes down. I think you would agree, where they decide not to mess with the NCAA and they go off and do their own thing and set their own rules. Depending on how this comes down, they've got smart lawyers. They may figure out a way to kind of do their own organization. And you look up and we've got 2 super conferences of 20, 24 teams each. And they've become just a Saturday version, football wise anyway, of the NFL with salary caps, et cetera, where they're kind of making their own rules depending on how this plays out.
Sure. I mean, that's definitely a possibility. And then it becomes like, in terms of whether or not that occurs sort of under the broader umbrella of the NCAA or not, is a whole other question. I mean, don't forget right now, the one thing that's sort of tethering together what is currently Division I sports is the basketball tournament. Mm-hmm. And if there were a group of conferences that decided they wanted to go their own way, okay, are they prepared to be the ones that blow up the basketball tournament as you know it?
Yeah, and which Jim Delaney kind of hinted at that 10, 12 years ago, when he was talking about setting up the Big Ten network. But is there any advantage to the schools trying to take the football program and make it separate from the rest of the athletic department? I was just wondering if you've got it affects so many things in terms of Title IX with the number of scholarships required, and of course obviously those players will be higher compensated than other ones. Have there been any talk of having them be kind of affiliations with the universities but not an actual part of that athletic department?
I think if you go down that road where you're sort of separating football from the rest of the athletics program and potentially from the rest of the educational enterprise, that starts getting really complicated on myriad levels. Whether or not there should be separate governance within sort of the traditional college structure, whether there should be separate governance and sort of financing of football is, that's a little bit different question. But you're still going to have to deal with Title IX. I don't sense any appetite anywhere by anybody that would result in, okay, let's split football out of the consideration for Title IX. There's, that would require congressional action, and that ain't happening.
Yeah. We can't get regular bills passed
on anything.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's a non-starter. We've got about a minute left, and so give me kind of to wrap this up, because boy, this is fascinating. We could talk about it for a long time. What's the next step in this? I mean, in terms of the next few months, what's the next role that the next piece that's going to happen in this process?
Well, I mean, you've got a series of court cases that are rolling along here that are sort of probably to be the next things to be decided. I mean, the Dartmouth thing has now been decided. It'll sort of be put on hold for a while. You'll have what's going on in the LA version of the NLRB. There is a case pending before the Third Circuit, the Third U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. That's also a labor case that involves the recognition of athletes under the Fair Labor Standards Act, which would essentially make the athletes hourly wage earners. And that is the appellate court would be setting the stage for a trial at the lower court level. So I think that may be kind of the next shoe to drop. That decision that case was sort of wrapped up about a year ago. And so people have been waiting for an opinion from the Third Circuit. And then you have this other antitrust litigation pending in California, the House case. You have this multi-billion-dollar damages award that's sitting out there that may go to trial late 2024, early 2025. But the Third Circuit decision, what everybody refers to as the Johnson case, is, I think, because of the next thing that may drop out.
Okay. Okay. Well, this is, listen, we appreciate your time and thank you for, first, your great reporting and for giving us some clarity, and for all of our listeners as well. This has been great stuff. We hope we can get you to come back on again and talk more about this, because this is something that we're just beginning to scratch the surface. As you well know, this ain't going anywhere.
No, I appreciate you having me on, and I'm delighted that you'd have me back, because this isn't going anywhere.
Yeah. Well, you can count on that. We'll be calling very soon. Steve, thanks so much. Steve Berkowitz, once again, reporter for USA Today. We really good reporting on this. And again, as you can see, this is just kind of one piece of this. It's been ongoing, and there's much more to come. If you get a chance, if you're on X, give him a follow. ByBerkowitz, B-Y Berkowitz is his handle on X. We follow him. We think you should as well. Steve, again, thanks for your time. We'll talk with you soon. Hey,
Thank
stay
you.
with us. Well, you got it. We've got lots more to come. Quick time out, and the conversation continues right here next.